Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we are joined by Darren Smith of Emond. So, first of all, Darren, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. And perhaps maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to speak with you. In terms of myself, I've had a bit of a roller coaster ride getting to where I am, but for the most part, well, I'm a member of the bar. So I was called to the bar in 2004, and I practiced civil and commercial litigation for about 15 years. During that time, I spent a lot of it as an articling principal, and I was mentoring a lot of the junior lawyers, and I found myself really attracted to the education portion and to giving back. And so after about 15 years of practice, I decided to make a bit of a switch and get into education. So that's where I got involved with Emond Publishing and eventually with Emond Exam Prep. And that was about 5 years ago, and I love my job.
Yes, so maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your job and kind of the role there on first, from the publishing side, right, until now on the exam prep side and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so I've worn a couple of hats in publishing. So one was as publisher for the law school case books. With that, I was responsible for overseeing the law school books, dealing with authors, putting together new editions, as well as updating new editions. And through that, I got a really good opportunity to meet a lot of interesting people, a lot of academics, and was able to take a lot of the information and the knowledge that I gained through working with them and transition that into working with them on exam prep. And so my role with exam prep is right now sort of a business and product manager, and my role sees me doing a number of things. So I develop product and find new ways to try to bring information in a lucid and understandable way to bar and paralegal candidates to help them best understand a lot of the information and materials that they're getting from the Law Society and be more successful at their licensing exams. And so we do that in a number of ways. We have courses, we have videos that we do. We've introduced practice exams and flashcards and all kinds of other things designed to help people with different ways or who benefit from different ways of learning to understand principles and fundamentals of some of these complex legal concepts and a lot of the processes involved that people will see and be required to know for their licensing exams and into practice.
Perfect. So maybe you can kind of, I know for me at least, my focus these days is my paralegal students and them that are preparing for the next exam, which is July 30th. But I mean, somebody can be listening to this in the future. Anything that you can kind of start with, maybe generally from your time, in terms of maybe you can start by telling us some of the different resources that are available for paralegal students in particular, and then we can go from there.
Sure. The first thing that I would say, and this is something that I've gleaned from speaking with a lot of paralegal candidates and looking at some of the information that's been provided by the Law Society and some of their reports, is that a lot of paralegal candidates seem to believe that, I've learned everything I kind of need to know from my program, and I can sort of launch right into the practice, into the licensing exams. But unfortunately, it doesn't always relate that way, and it doesn't necessarily transition straight into the licensing exams. And so Not enough attention is given to the Law Society materials that are provided for you or to you. And I think the one really big thing to understand is that you must pay a lot of attention and dedicate a lot of time to reading, reviewing, and understanding those materials. The Law Society considers that all of that material is fair game, and any and all of it could show up on an exam. And so, what we do at Emond Exam Prep is we try to facilitate understanding, and we try to build on your knowledge in order to give you the best opportunity for success through being able to take information, apply it to the facts and information that you're getting in this multiple choice style exam, and critically think so that you're applying information from the materials to information from the questions and being better at finding and selecting best answers. As a result, generating greater success. And we do that through a number of different ways. So we have webinar or live webinar courses, which are coming up on July 26 and 27. What they do is they provide an opportunity for paralegal candidates to review their knowledge, to make sure that they understand what the Law Society is telling them in terms of the printed materials, to make sure that they have a strong foothold on processes and principles. So we go through a lot of that in the live webinars. Then we also, throughout the rest of the year, make available videos, which are the edited versions of the live webinars. And paralegal candidates who are writing later in November or in February the following year can use that as a basis for preparing, getting that information all the same. Yes, it's not quite the same as having it live and being able to get the instructor responses to some directed questions, but the information is still there for you to learn from. One of the ways that we say is most effective is watching our videos, then reading the chapter. So if you're looking to start with, say, administrative law, you watch the videos, you understand the concepts, the processes, all the little nuances to all the things going on in the world of administrative law. Then once you start attacking the Law Society study materials in administrative law, things are going to be a lot clearer. You'll understand things better. Things will click. You'll retain information better. You'll understand the stuff better. The other thing it does is it creates greater efficiency. So instead of having to read something 3 or 4 times to understand it, you'll only need to read it once. So that's sort of the course material. Then we have practice exams. We have for paralegals 4 different versions in A, B, C, and D. Each one is different. So every exam has a completely different set of questions. And we offer it in a couple of different ways. You can choose to do an open practice exam, which is designed to allow you to take your time, go through your materials, answer questions as best you can, trying to get the information from your head, from the materials, and get questions correct. The other way that we can do it is we have a simulated exam where we introduce the timing. We introduce the conditions that you're going to experience during the actual licensing exam with a hard 4.5 hour cutoff. The idea behind that is it allows you to also practice additional things that are important for your exam: time management strategies, multiple choice answering skills, working with an index, and your materials getting in, getting out really quickly back onto the exam. All the kinds of things that are going to really make that difference in terms of your success. And then lastly, we have flashcards. Flashcards are exactly as they say. Each topic or substantive topic on the exam has a separate set of questions, question on one side, answer on the next. And the idea is that for building and memorizing information, you can use flashcards, you can gamify it a couple of different ways, go through it and start seeing, is that time and effort that I'm putting into the materials paying off with me being able to remember things. And you can go through it time and time and time again until you are building up that memorization of information. Doesn't work for everybody, but for many it does. And so through having that multitude of different products, you can find the things that are best for you, that are going to work in collaboration with your self-study, and really, do everything you possibly can. Invest in yourself to get you over that hurdle. That's the licensing exam and onto your future career as a practicing paralegal.
Perfect. So, I mean, with the next exam about 6 to 8 weeks away, anything you can share kind of for students that are, maybe they may have just gotten their materials in the last week. They've kind of looked at it maybe very quickly. Perhaps they've gone in and looked at a couple of chapters. But from your experience, what are some of the mistakes that people make at this stage? Um, with respect to, as you said, not familiarizing yourself with the materials, and then any suggestions of how to better interact and engage with what the law study provides.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the first thing, and I sort of mentioned it earlier, is respect the materials. It's a lot there. The Law Society expects you to know it, and they're going to examine you on it. And so it's going to include an awful lot more information and things you haven't touched on in your courses. Now, in terms of being able to manage getting through all that information, doing practice exams, dealing with life for those of us who have to also work and have family obligations, the most important thing that I can suggest is working with a study schedule. You need to figure out, what am I going to to tackle first? How do I want to go about it? And then how much time can I commit to it? So we know that the next exam is on July 30th. Now you have to work backwards. Take a calendar, any kind of calendar. If you work regularly in Outlook, as I do on my laptop, if you use the calendar on your phone, or if you use a day timer, doesn't matter. Whatever you are going to on a regular basis, you want to plot out your course day by day, covering the materials that you want to do. Figure out, do I want to start with criminal, quasi-criminal? Do I want to start with ethics and professionalism? Doesn't matter, whatever works for you. Have a look at the materials, understand how many pages there are, and then plot out what you're going to do each day. If it's going to be watching a video, put that in. If it's going to be doing a practice exam, put that in. You want a visual record. That does a couple of things. One, it makes sure that nothing falls through the gaps and that you're not duplicating anything. It's easy to lose track of where you are, what you've covered, and not cover a section within the materials, or maybe unfortunately lose time because you've done something twice, not having a record of what you've already done and what you're going to do. The other thing is that it also holds you accountable to yourself. We have to be really disciplined when we are getting ready for these exams. There's a lot of material to cover. You can't take it lightly. If you are anything like me, I'm inherently lazy, and if I can put something off to the next day, I'll find any reason to do it. Unfortunately, I'll do the same thing the next day. However, if you've got a schedule that's in front of you that you're looking at all the time, you're going to quickly see, I didn't do this material yesterday. Okay, I need to do it now. And so if you have scheduled yourself to do 30 pages one day, 30 pages the next day. Well, all of a sudden, that next day, you're dealing with 60. And if you put it off the next time, you're dealing with 90. And that quickly becomes something that is just too much. And it's hard to catch up. So it's important to be regimented, to be disciplined, and to hold yourself accountable to make sure you get through everything that you need to. So that's probably the biggest tip that I would have.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly kind of like breaking it up into chunks, as you said, right? If you're looking at 90 pages today and you get through 15 and you're like, that's it, I'm done. Like, it's too much. It's not a very realistic goal to do all that in such a short period of time. But again, the scheduling will go working backwards, as you say, coming to today's date, and you say, okay, well, this is how much time you have, and here's the material you need to go through. I think even one of my students put some prompts into Chat GPT with that parameters, and they created the schedule for them. So
Mm-hmm.
again, once you have that, then you got to stick to the schedule. Now, you mentioned some of the resources on Emond there, in particular, practice tests, right? And I think you've highlighted this already, that there's one way to do it as a simulation. The other is to kind of just try to answer questions, right? I mean, um, certainly, as you point out, I mean, 4.5 hours, to do 160 questions is not that much time. And it works out to, I mean, it used to be 90 seconds, but if, depending on if you use that 30 minutes as a break, or you use every second there, and you hold yourself at your desk the entire time. But it's basically just over a minute and a half there to get through each question. What can they do in terms of managing that time, like in terms of keeping track of how long it's going to take and how many questions you need to go through when using a resource like the practice exams?
Right. So time management is so important when it comes to the exams. And I'm glad you raised this because a lot of people figure, okay, I'll just go through everything as quickly as I can without realizing that when we are in depth and we're engrossed in these exams and these questions, we can actually lose track of time. If you get into your materials, before you know it, 5 minutes have gone by and you have no sense of it whatsoever. What what I recommend is using a timer sheet. Timer sheets are essentially a spreadsheet or a chart that kind of lays out where you should be at certain questions and what your time should be. So if we're starting at 10 o'clock in the morning for your exam, you can easily figure out how much time per question you have by just breaking up the number of questions over the 4.5 hours. Okay. You convert it into minutes and then just divide it into that. But as you suggested, one of the things that we might want to do is take a break. And I'm going to highly recommend that because to hold yourself for 4.5 hours at a desk under those conditions, it's very hard to do. So taking a break is going to be good for you, even if it's say a 10-minute break a couple of times. Now, when you're figuring out that timer sheet, you want to factor those in. So every say 10 questions, every 15 questions, you want to equate the amount of time that it takes to get through that and where it might be. So if it's 1.5 minutes or 90 seconds in, we know that we've got um, 900 seconds after 10 minutes. That's, I don't know, a minute and a half, nine. So that's about 13 minutes in, roughly. So at 10 questions in, you want to be about 10 minutes and 13 seconds or 10:13 a.m. So you'll check at 10 questions, 10:13, you'll check the clock in the room and you'll see you're either on time, you're ahead of time, you're falling behind already. And check again. at the 20th question. You do that because what happens is you want to catch yourself early if you're falling behind. So if by 20 questions in, and maybe I should be around 10:30 in the morning, I'm finding I'm at 10:35. Okay, we're recognizing I got a bit of a problem. I'm falling behind already. So now I got to step it up. If you don't do that and you figure, okay, I'll do that maybe 50 questions in or 60 questions in, you could be 10, 15, 20 minutes behind by that time already. And it's going to be impossible for you to catch up. The reason that's important is because if you don't, before you know it, the proctor is going to be announcing that the exam is up in 10 minutes. And you could be sitting with 40 questions you haven't even cast your eyes upon, and now you're scrambling. The other thing too is even if you do check and 50, 60 questions in and you see you're 10, 15, 20 minutes in, what that does is that introduces an extra level of stress and anxiety, can often introduce panic. Once that stuff creeps in, you're already going to be stressed out. But once you add that, now your brain stops thinking. Now you're not able to conduct any critical thinking. You're just panicking and everything starts to fall apart. So that's where the time management skills come in. And that's where a timer sheet can really help you. And examples of timer sheets can be found all over the internet. Just do a Google search and you'll find all kinds of examples.
And certainly, in terms of doing, let's say, like the Emond questions, I believe this time, and you can correct me, I think that there's sets are moved up to 160 questions. So you could almost do like a real like simulation of the exam, get your materials ready maybe a couple weeks before the exam, have your note your books, sort of the material books, any index highlights you've made, notes, diagrams, whatever, and then you can press start, I guess, on the exam, and it'll run for 4.5 hours, and it'll be like the real exam. I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit on that, but I mean, I think that would be the best use, right? I mean, and you're saying there's 4 sets, so you could probably do that over a couple of weeks, 4 different times, and then learn from each experience of time management, as we just talked about, as well as what it's like. I mean, the other thing is not necessarily the time. It's just like, well, there's 160 questions, right? I mean, I don't think you've gone through tests in school that are that long, right? In terms of content wise. So, your brain kind of slows down towards the end. So you got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not only is it just the number of questions, but it's also the format. Very, very few programs or courses do all multiple choice questions. And so this kind of format for an exam like this is a challenge as well. So with our practice exams, as an example, each one, so whether it's A, B, C, or D, each one comes with 4 attempts. And what we often suggest is you can select to do both open practice and simulated, where you'd get 2 attempts on the open, 2 attempts on the simulated. I regularly recommend that candidates use one of the open practice exams to uh, basically go through, as I said, try to figure out the questions, get as many correct as you can. Once you submit it, you'll get the answers, everything, your score back instantly. And then use that as an additional study tool. The questions will relate to the answers, which will relate to the explanations that are provided. It's going to show you, okay, this section of the small claims court rules apply in this, or you know, the appeal would go to the divisional court on on this tribunal decision. All those different kinds of things, and then the explanations that you get for every single question help you understand how that works, and demonstrates the critical thinking process that you need to be applying during the exam. So you get all of that stuff, you do it early, and at the bottom, we also have analytics that kind of shows you what your strengths and weaknesses are. So you can also adjust your study schedule to spend more time in the areas where you're struggling more than others. Ideally, you want to be equally strong across all the substantive topics. That's the best way that you're going to perform well on the licensing exam. Then, as you get closer, maybe do another open exam. See, check your performance, see if you're improving, see if you need to do any more adjustment. And you save two of those simulated exams for closer to when you've done a lot of your prep, when you're almost ready to go. And it does exactly that. It introduces those stresses, it introduces a similar environment to what you're going to get on the exam. That's when you practice the time management. You start working on little skills like eliminating the obviously incorrect answers. Right? You start figuring out how to look for those clues in the questions that are going to help you to find the best answer. And that's how you can really, really improve your performance. And the more practice exams you do, the better.
And speaking of format, one of the big things there, I mean, that we both missed there is that it's an open book exam, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of those students that I've had or coming from many different colleges, there's a lot of closed book. If they're doing multiple choice closed book, some have short answers and essays, but overwhelmingly, I'm doing closed book exams. And so when they approach this exam, they're trying to like memorize in their reading. And so they see those questions and they're like, oh, I don't know what the answer is. Let me think a little bit more. But you do have the benefit of going to your materials, the table of contents, or if you've made an index or notes to help you and then move on to the next question. Now, some people say they have enough time to do that every question. Others will say, a few depending on, how they're progressing with time. But anything you could share about the fact that it's an open book exam and how to approach questions differently than a closed book exam.
Yeah, the first thing that I would say is don't equate an open book exam with being easier. In fact, it's going to be quite the opposite because it's an open book exam, it's more likely to be highly detailed. And so it will require you to be able to engage with your materials, your resources efficiently and effectively. People will try to memorize as much as they can. And I'm not saying this in any arrogant way or not, but I don't care who you are, you're never going to memorize everything. I know a lot of brilliant people. I've worked with a lot of brilliant people, and they couldn't even do it. So there are going to be questions where you do need to rely on your materials. So how do you make that effective? Um, you know, you need to be smart and organize the materials so that what you're doing is giving yourself that opportunity to find the nuggets really quickly. What do I mean by that? Well, when we are doing the exam, the Law Society isn't asking you anything about the commentary or the discussion within the materials. They're going to ask you questions that relate to what is the law, what is the rule, those kinds of pointed questions. And if we go in and we just highlight everything, and it's a common thing for most of us to do, right? When we're reading materials, we're understanding things, we want to make sure that we're understanding how do we get here, how did this case law develop, what's the history of judicial review when we're talking about judicial review in administrative law. There's a whole Dunsmuir and Nicolishin and all these cases that have developed over time. We don't need that. What we need to know is right now it's Vavilov. right? And so you want to be just highlighting those very few things. Maybe it's a sentence, maybe it's two sentences. And the reason for that is if you've gone and highlighted three, four paragraphs around all that stuff, and you need to dive into your materials to find something to help you on a question that you just can't remember, well, now you have to sift through three or four paragraphs to find that one little nugget of information that you need. The other thing, too, is think about taking a strategic approach to highlighting as well. What works for a lot of people and makes things very, very easy is to use color coding in your highlighting. Generally, there are going to be a number of things that are important for you to know for the exam. They consist of legal principles, case law, um, acts or legislation, and oftentimes things like legal tests. And so what you want to do is create or designate a color for each one of those things. I use a lot of different examples, particularly when it comes to some of the bar candidates. But I'll just quickly talk about a difference between a legal principle and a legal test. So you may get asked a question about contracts. We all talk about contracts and we learn about contracts in our paralegal courses, right? It's part of the torts. Um, and maybe you're doing a specific course on contracts. So there's a legal principle and there's a legal test that often get conflated. So if we get a question that talks about, um, demonstrating that there 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 is a contract or an agreement between the people or between the parties, right? Or whether or not a contract actually exists, those are two things. So if I ask, you know, uh, can a contract exist under these circumstances? A lot of people are going to first think, okay, well, how do I show that? Offer acceptance and consideration. But that is different from whether or not a contract exists. What that demonstrates is that there is actually a legal contract in place. Um, to the legal principle to demonstrate whether or not a contract exists really comes down to one principle. It's called consensus ad atom. And that really means, a meeting of the minds. If there's no meeting of the minds between the parties, no contract can exist at all. Even if they've got something down in paper, if ultimately the two parties don't agree as to what, each side is doing, then there's a fundamental flaw in the agreement, and so no contract. So if I'm being asked different questions on the exam, and one relates to whether or not one exists or whether or not I can demonstrate a legal contract is in place, you want to be able to pick up on the differences. Now, if consensus ad atom, sorry, I'm getting that all messed up, but a meeting of the minds, I'm going to highlight, say, in yellow. So all my legal principles are going to be in yellow. My legal test, let's pick blue. So, you know, offer acceptance consideration, that's going to be a demonstration of the legal test to show whether or not the actual legal agreement exists. And depending on what I'm asked in the question, if I can't quite remember the answer and I've got to go and look into the materials, then what am I looking for? Either yellow or blue. But if everything is yellow, then I've got to look through everything on that page. If I'm looking for that test, all I'm looking for is the blue. And you can do that with other things, again, like legislation. So with an act, maybe use green. Highlight the name of the act, highlight the relevant portion of the legislation. Same thing with rules. With case law, use pink, highlight the case name and the ratio. And it's that way of organizing that's going to be most effective, most efficient. Get the more time you're spending on the exam instead of in the materials, the better able you are to get through the exam make sure that you are able to spend time, actual quality time on each question instead of having to guess and fill in the bubbles on a whole whack of questions you didn't get time to actually get to.
Thanks for that, Darren. Now, another thing that you mentioned before, like one of the resources that Emond has are flashcards. So, how would you recommend students, it may be part of a bundle they're getting, or they may buy it individually, but how to best make use of these flashcards as part of, your preparation for the exam?
Yeah, well, again, flashcards aren't for everybody, but for those who want to focus on memorization and straight recall, these are really effective tools. So we have them, they're available as a group of cards for the individual topics if you only want to get criminal and quasi-criminal, or if you only want to get ethics and professional responsibility and help you memorize important things related to those substantive topics, then you can do that. If you want to get them for all, we bundle them for all as well. And then essentially what you would do is incorporate that into your preparation. And you can sort of gamify it or just roll through the questions. You'll pull it up, it'll ask the question, and it'll have a very specific answer to it. And it's all going to be in terms of information or things that you will need to know. What is this act? What is, what rule relates to service in the rules of small claims court? How many days do you have to serve a claim after the plaintiff's claim has been issued? Those kinds of things. And it'll ask you, and usually what candidates will do is they'll roll through these and they'll do them over and over again and build up that memorization. It's an effective way to help you remember that stuff so that you don't have to go into the materials as much as possible. But again, they're not for everyone. They're a different learning style. I invite everyone to consider using them. It's it's not going to help you to figure out the critical thinking process, but it really goes a long way, or can go a long way, to ingraining information um, in your head and help in terms of just your overall knowledge of stuff you need to know.
Great. And I think the only other thing well we haven't mentioned obviously is tutoring, right? That there's tutoring
Mm-hmm.
services available. And again, people maybe have different understanding of what you're getting for, whether it's group tutoring or private tutoring. So again, I mean, what are some of the things, I know you've done some of those sessions yourselves there, that anything more you can share for students in terms of getting the most out of services like that? I know obviously if you've written the exam before and were unsuccessful, the law society also provides tutoring, but now how do you kind of gain, if you're going to look at that route of getting the most out of the time? Because again, you're getting one-on-one time, that you want to gain the best out of it to get sort of your money's worth there.
Right. So yeah, we offer one-on-one tutoring. We don't do group. We have tutors that specifically sit down with you on an individual basis and will help you to understand all the things that you might be struggling with. The best approach to tutoring, though, is don't think of it as somebody who's going to teach you everything you need to know. Okay? That's the wrong approach. If you want to do that, well, take another course. Go go in and review civil litigation or something in terms of your books and things like that. That's Tutoring really isn't designed for that. To get the most out of tutoring, what you want to do is understand, where am I struggling? What are the concepts I'm not getting? What do I need to understand something? So as you're going through the materials, you're doing your self-study. Maybe you're watching videos. Maybe you're working with your friends and you're recognizing that no matter what I'm doing, no matter how many times I try to approach it from different angles, I'm just not getting X. So start creating for yourself a number of questions and identifying things that you really want somebody to spend time with. Break it down, walk you through, explain the concepts, explain how things work. And then when you meet with a tutor, whether it's any of the tutors that we work, myself, or anybody else, right? You want to have that ready because it's going to give you exactly what you need and it's going to make the best use of your time. It's going to provide you the best value. Tutoring isn't cheap, it's an extra, but it can make the difference. And when you do it, you want it to be direct and to the point. If you approach it where you want somebody to just teach you something, one, they may not teach it in a style that works for you. Two, they may not know where to start. They may start right from the very beginning, and you could find yourself spending 5, 6, 7 hours with a tutor just to go through what's already in your study materials. So be very pointed with what you need to know, what you're struggling with. If there are things that you want to ask in terms of, how do I get through certain things? And tutoring doesn't necessarily have to be for substantive matters as well. It can be in terms of how do I organize for my prep? What kind of things can I do to create visual tools for myself so I can understand information because I'm more visual, those kinds of things. So that would be my advice in terms of approaching tutoring.
Perfect. And then one other thing, I mean, certainly you've shared a lot of different tips about highlighting and schedules, and I think it's relatively new, the exam strategies course, right? That and maybe on the barrister
Mhm.
solicitor side as well. But I mean, anything more that way maybe we haven't covered here as we get close to the end of other strategies that again sometimes again it's a completely different exam that uh, students are not really ready for in terms of beyond the material, right? I mean, whether it's again having a schedule as we've talked about, highlighting, color coding, time management, and anything else there that you can add to that that'll help, and even for those writing the barrister and solicitor exams that can be applied there as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned the exam strategy course. So that's something that we've just recently added. It's a series of animated modules that kind of walk through different elements in terms of how do we prepare for the exams, how do we study for the exams, how do we deal with all the little nuances of the exam, how do we approach the questions, so exam writing techniques, those kinds of things. And it actually comes with the practice exams. So if anybody does purchase our practice exams to prepare, that comes with it. And so you can watch it repeatedly. It's going to give you a lot of great advice. But there are a couple of additional things that we sort of touch on it in the exam strategy course, and most people don't think about it. But I would certainly want to remind everybody that your mental health is just as important as you working on your knowledge for the exam. You want to look after yourself because if you don't, you won't necessarily be at your prime when it comes to writing the exam. You need to give yourself rest, to look after yourself from a um, from both physical and mental perspectives. So make sure that you look after that. You also want to make sure that you are paying close attention to language on the exam. People, unfortunately, aren't as attuned to language and don't look at things closely enough as they're trying to get through questions quickly or looking at the answers quickly. So language is extremely important for the exams. A may versus shall on a question can make a complete difference on whether or not you get it right. And that one question could be the difference between you passing and not passing. So be particularly focused on that kind of stuff. And as you're doing practice exams, whether it's ours or anybody else's, and this is why doing a lot of practice exams is going to help, pay attention to language, making sure you're doing that. It's also going to help you pick up the clues to help you to identify even not necessarily the correct answer, but help you pick up on the ones that are clearly not right and then get rid of them quickly. Right. So if you play things strategically, if you can get rid of two of the question or two of the answers, oh, even if you have to guess, then you've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Right. So you've already doubled your chances. What else could I suggest? Be honest with yourself. Okay. Look within, really take a hard um, look in terms of self-assessment, what you know, what you don't know, and approach the materials in the exam sincerely. This is a tough exam, and this means your ability to practice as paralegal or not. And think of the consequences for not getting over the hump the first time. People often say, well, your stuff is expensive. And I get it. Um, we try to be as cost conscious as possible, but times are tough for a lot of people. But if you look at it as an investment, it makes sense because if you're cavalier about the exam and you're not taking it as seriously as you should, and if you can afford the help, and I'm not just talking about Emond exam prep, but any of the other services out there, right? Think about doing that because if you are unsuccessful, well, one, you've got to repay the writing fees. You have to spend all that time prepping again, right? Time is worth something as well. You're giving up time with friends, family. I'm sure you'd rather be doing a million other things instead of sitting looking through Law Society study materials. And then there's a possibility as well that that's going to prevent you from starting early and earning an income as a paralegal. So there's that cost consequence as well. So all this just sums up as saying, take the exam seriously.
Perfect, Darren. So, Darren, thanks again for taking the time and joining us here today. Last question. Are there any final? I know you just gave some tidbits of advice there. So, any final words of wisdom for anyone listening? Not necessarily just the students who may be writing the exam, but anyone else maybe interested in getting into education and in the route you've gone, and with 15 years of experience practicing as a lawyer and then switching over, and that certainly couldn't be easy. After doing what you've been doing for all that time. But anything to wrap up. And once again, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us here today.
In terms of anything else to add, I would want to say love what you do, enjoy what you do. Okay? You've got a great opportunity as paralegals, as legal service providers to make a difference. You can help people and not just necessarily clients, but you can be advocates for social justice. You can help others by giving back, right? Love what you do. That's kind of what led me into legal education. I got so much out of helping articling students, out of helping junior lawyers understand things, see things, have those epiphanies, those aha moments, that it was just something I wanted to do all the time, right? And make sure that you make sure that you're doing what's right for you. Yeah, it's hard to do the switch like what I did, and I know a lot of colleagues who are still practicing law because um, they didn't want to give up the lifestyle, or they're too far in, and all those things. Well, I made a lot of hard sacrifices myself, and I gave up a lot. My world changed considerably, but at the end of the day, I'm doing what I love to do every single day, and I'm much happier for it. I'm enjoying life a lot more for it, and you can all do that as well. Right? Being a paralegal is what makes you smile each and every day. If making the change in somebody's life makes you smile every day, then you're in the right place.
Perfect. So thanks again for taking the time, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. All the best.
Thank you.